I've had the great honor and privilege to see firsthand the work he's doing around the world. Talk about making America powerful, soft power. As he always says, the power of our example is much better than the example of our power. And that's indeed what he's done through Clinton Global Initiative and his foundation, where they're helping millions and millions of people, everything from reducing HIV drug costs, so it can go from 400,000 people a year to 5 million being treated a year in Africa, to making safe water, making industries around developing countries. Well, let me stop. Without further ado, someone that without him we would not have our movement be where it is, anywhere near where it is, President Bill Clinton. Thank you.
Joe, thanks to you, Sarah, and your whole plan for doing this now for the 4th time, and for those of you who are coming for the first time and those who, like me, are full-term veterans. I want to acknowledge in the crowd 2 great champions of better health care with whom I worked for many years. Our Senator Barbara Boxer and her husband Stu, and former Senator Tom Hutchins of Iowa. We were talking backstage about contributions of Dr. Kai Zakharovsky and Dr. David Mayer, and unlike them, I don't know anything, except that this patient safety movement is really important. At a time when people's life expectancy is increasing and everybody just assumes as we get older, the cost of healthcare is going through the roof, even in countries that manage it better than we do now. It is both a moral and an economic imperative not to let anybody die sooner than they have to. And to do it, the most economical way to do it, obviously, is to keep them healthy. So I have been an ardent proponent of this since Joe announced it at our Clinton Global Initiative several years ago. And I've been amazed by the progress you've made. And I just want those of you who are really committed to this to think about the model by which the progress has been achieved. Get everybody together, listen to people's agreements and disagreements, decide on a course of action, and then go do something. The world is awash today in conflicts by people who think the only thing that matters is our differences, that blame is more important than responsibility, and that conflict works better than cooperation. That's all wrong. If you really look at where good things are happening, it's where there are diverse groups of people who actually air their disagreements, make better decisions as a result, and then get the show on the road. And that's what is needed everywhere in the world. And it's what's needed in the American healthcare system. I also think it's important that none of us ever decline to do something that would make a difference because it won't make all the difference. I find there are no permanent victories in almost any endeavor. When people get frustrated with incremental progress or with setbacks, I tell them in politics, economics, and life, there are few permanent victories. You take your victories, celebrate them, try to spread them to as many people as possible. And remember what Martin Luther King said, that the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. If you're bending the arc, that's good enough in ways large and small. I remember a few years ago when, well, more than a decade ago now, when I had my heart surgery, and I was asked by the American Heart Association to do something to try to advance our common interest in reducing coronary artery disease and its other related conditions. And I said, I don't want to do PSAs, I want to have a project. Let's tackle childhood obesity, and they agreed to do it. And I really didn't have a clue what to do, but I had some insight into what people who were not in government and not running big health institutions could do from our experience trying to mount a global response to the AIDS crisis in the early part of the last decade, before there was any global fund on HTV and malaria, before the American PEPFAR program had passed under President George W. Bush. And essentially what we did was to go to the generic drug manufacturers and ask them to change their business model to go from a low volume, uncertain payment, therefore high margin business, to a massive volume, certain payment, low margin business. Today, there were then 200,000 people in the non-rich world getting AIDS medicine, 2/3 of them in Brazil, which was rapidly rising, most of the rest in Thailand, which had its own pharmaceutical companies, and nearly no one in Africa where the epidemic was blazing. Today, there are about 17 million people alive because of AIDS medicine, and more than half of them are on contracts that our Health Access Initiative negotiated for the lowest high quality drugs in the world, and that includes 76% of the children. And the good news is everybody else is pretty much within 10% of that, because it is morally and economically unsustainable to charge other customers who may not have the volumes we do much more than like a 10% overhead. So I got to thinking, what could we do? And I learned that there were children who were grossly overweight, who were consuming 50 to 60% of the total calories a day in the drinks they were consuming at schools. And it was at a time when the ingestion of excess sugar was leading to a massive increase in type 2 diabetes in America. I remember after Katrina hit in New Orleans, and I went down there with the first President Bush, we were trying to figure out what we could do. And we divided up the Gulf Coast, and I went to the cities in Mississippi. And I went to this housing development where people had a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and most of them had just made their last payment before all their homes were destroyed. And the designated spokesperson was a woman in her late 30s, very articulate, in a wheelchair because she'd already had a leg amputated above the knee because of type 2, not type 1 diabetes. So we got all the major soft drink manufacturers together and said, look, we know you're not trying to kill these children that are consuming 50 to 60% of their daily calories from drinks in schools. But this is a very bad thing for our country from the point of view of health, economics, and just ethics. So can we get together and do what we did with the AIDS drugs, find a different way to make money? I'm not asking anybody to lose money, but surely to goodness there's some way for you to mine the market that is the schools of America without doing this. And you don't want these people to be in wheelchairs when they're in their 30s, otherwise they won't be buying many soft drinks. And we'll have a bankrupt healthcare system. So they got together and all agreed, and we got a waiver so they wouldn't be sued for antitrust violations. And the biggest ones, Coke, Pepsi, Cadbury, Schweppes, major juice manufacturers, because that had a lot of sugar, the big processed fruit juice sizes. They agreed, and we had, within 4 years, we had 2 separate independent studies say that there had been a 90% reduction in the calories and more in the sugar, but just in the calories shipped to our schools through drinks. And that's an amazing thing. So that's what we try to realized I was asked by the First Lady Michelle Obama to see if our initiative could, because we were already involved in this, take over supervision of greater exercise programs in our schools. And now we have about 30 million kids in 18,000 schools. I can reverse it, 18 million kids in 30,000 schools. In our education and athletics programs and exercise programs, bringing back programs which had vanished from many schools. And finally we got an independent study this year, thank you, Senator Boxer, covering almost 300 California schools. The first time anybody had bothered to study whether greater activity, properly organized, would drive down obesity and improve her health. And the study found that the schools that were actively involved in this performed measurably better on indexes relating to obesity and the attendant problems that grow out of it than those that didn't. I'm saying all this to say that the model you have here should be the model for problem solving across a whole range of things in the 21st century world. And we're pushing against trends of atomization of communities in politics, in warfare, in culture, all over the world. Because what really works to solve complex problems in a diverse, interdependent, and complex world are networks of cooperation. And the big challenge you've got here is how to meet Joe's goal of ending all unnecessary hospital deaths by 2020, because scaling up is always the biggest challenge. And the more actors you have to engage, the bigger the challenge is. We did the AIDS thing because there were only a few major generic drug producers in the world who had drugs that would pass anybody's health standards. We were able to succeed with the soft drink thing because there were just a few companies in the soft drink and processed fruit juice sector who control a massive share of the market. We tried to do the same thing with the candies that were served in vending machines in school, and we contacted 43 companies, producers, and we got a lot of support. We didn't have anything like the success there. So I'll give you an example of where we tried to do something and have not yet succeeded. We had nowhere near as much success because we had so many moving parts. People were therefore understandably more skeptical of the outcome, and they were afraid that if they agreed to make changes which increased their cost in the short run and would take 3 or 4 years to show that the revenues would still be there, that they would have enough competitors that would take advantage of them. So anytime you've got a lot of actors and a lot of moving parts, it's a bigger challenge. That's why you have to make a movement. And that's why this is so important. So Joe wants me to spend most of my time answering questions, but since all of you know more about this than I do, I think it's more important for me to tell you that I think I have learned a very great deal since I left politics about what works in a world where you have to assume responsibility and you can't get away with just placing blame. You got to figure out, you got to ask yourself every day, what can I do to make things better? And once you have an answer, you have to do it. You can't be deterred by the fact that others aren't, or that there are other things that have to be done. You have to do what you can. And if you do it in networks of creative cooperation, pretty soon you'll be amazed. When we started on the AIDS drugs, if anybody told me that we'd go from 200,000 to 18 million people plus, and that these contracts that I started hammering out would eventually account for more than half the people staying alive and 3/4 of the kids staying alive, I wouldn't have believed it. If anybody told me we could have a 90% reduction in calories from drinks going to kids in school. I wouldn't have believed it. I wasn't even sure that the exercise programs could be dense enough in America and organized enough to show a marked decline in obesity. But it started as something little, but with a lot of partners. And if you think about what we're facing with the aging of populations, with the constant pressure to democratize health care within our national borders and beyond them, so that there's not a dramatic difference in what the rich and the non-rich can get, which is one of the most important aspects, I think, of Joe's other life in non-invasive technology development, and a lot of the things that you're looking at here. And you think about how we're going to pay for all this and start giving workers in America a wage increase again, and give people some hope that we can not only lengthen the years we live, but improve the quality of the years that we have. It's hard to think of one single solitary thing that would show a bigger difference than eliminating all the unnecessary patient deaths. It will improve the efficiency and the margins of hospitals and healthcare providers while actually lowering the cost. And it will create a market of intense hunger for ever better practices within hospitals, ever better technologies. And besides, you'll feel better about yourselves if we do it. And that counts for something. I find the older I get, the more time I spend thinking about the future. And I won't give you all the disgusting grandparent stories that everybody else has probably heard 1,000 times, but it does make a difference when you get a new excuse to think about tomorrow. And when you realize we're all just passing through here. And the greatest gift we can give is to give more freedom, more opportunities, and a greater sense of responsibility, which can be turned into result to all the people coming along behind. I just can't think in the healthcare space of anything we can do right now that could have a quicker turnaround and return in those blessings than this movement. I honor you for doing it and all the people who are supporting you. And I hope that these little examples I cited from the work I've tried to do give you some encouragement that you can do much more. Biggest problem we got is there may be too many actors to meet the 2020 deadline unless somebody else gets off the sideline. That's what you got to think about. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. I've often said that without you there wouldn't be a movement, and it's really true. I remember when we first talked about it, how I gave you some of the statistics. You said this is more people than we've lost in the Vietnam and Korean War combined, and we're losing it annually. But thank you for committing. Thank you for coming. We're all grateful to you. One of the things I wanted to ask you, President Clinton, at your recent Clinton Global Initiative conference, you said something I really loved hearing, which is stop looking at the headlines and stop looking at the trend lines. What are the trends that you see that should make us all feel hopeful about the future?
Well, first of all, last year, the Millennium Development Goals that the UN had embraced expired, and new goals were established for the next decade called the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of those goals weren't met, but a lot of the healthcare goals were actually exceeded. There was a big drop in infant mortality, a big drop in the number of children 5 and under who are dying from the dirty water diseases, a big increase that we've been involved in trying to keep any of these kids from dying from diarrhea with a 50-cent dose of oral rehydration therapy and zinc. And we're trying to save 1 million lives in Africa right now just by distributing it. We even have people in rural Nigeria where Boko Haram, the terrorist group, is prominent. None of them, knock on wood, so far have been attacked or shot at or prevented from doing their work. That's a trend line. Now there is more and more focus, not just in the wealthy countries, but in the poor countries, on what is killing middle-aged and older people. How can we deal with all the chronic major actors? And I think the other thing that hasn't been talked enough about is I'm really encouraged that the National Institutes of Cancer announced, in the face of the progress being made at Sloan Kettering, St. Jude, Dana-Farber, increasing at MD Anderson, pioneered by Patrick Soon-Shiong in LA, of ending cancer studies based on the physical site of the malignancy in the body and going straight to what's in the genome. And that is going to open up a whole new range of possibilities for both those people who try to get drugs to kill the cancers and those who try to activate the body's own system to destroy malignancies. In both trends, you're going to see dramatic changes because of this. And I've talked to 3 people I know in this field just by accident. I've run into them in the last 6 weeks in different parts of America where I've been otherwise occupied. And I asked them just as a conversation starter, I said, what do you think the odds are that we can get to 85% survival rate from all forms of cancer within the next 10 years? And they said, high. So think of these trend lines. More people have moved from extreme poverty into the global and middle class than at any time in history. Is there horrible residue from the financial crash? Yes. And we need to take the biggest exceptions to the trends and address them. That's what we're dealing with in America today, by the way. The United States, in all the aggregate statistics, is in better shape than any other big economy on earth. We're also got more diversity. We're younger than every country but China. If they hadn't changed that one-child policy, we would have been younger than them within about a decade, 15 years maybe. Everything's great. We got people like you here. Somebody here from everywhere. But 84% of us are living on the same or less money per year than we were the day of the crash 8 years ago. Or 7.5 years ago. Half of us are living, after adjustment for inflation, on the same or lower income than we were the last day I was president. That was practically in the dark ages for people under 25, 15 years ago. So we have to deal with that. Our health indicators are good, except for the first time. Our statistics go back 60 years, but it's much longer than that. Working class people without a college degree in their middle years. The study's only been done from people ages 45 to 54, but it's a wider deal than that. They have their life expectancy going down because of the rise of opiate and heroin addiction, followed closely by alcoholism, followed closely by suicide. Now, I think what you're going to die of is a broken heart because all their dreams are crushed. But we need more mental health facilities. We need more treatments. That's a trend. But it's a trend right now confined to us and offset by the fact that in spite of the adversity we went through, the Hispanic life expectancy is still rising for all educated income groups. African American life expectancy and Asian life expectancy have held steady. So we need to look, every time you read something, you need to ask yourself, is this a trend or a headline? Look, the American people were totally freaked out by what happened in San Bernardino. They should have been. But since 9/11, 45 Americans have been killed by people in terrorist incidents who said they were acting to advance a form of radical Islamic terror. Only 45. Now those 45 were precious lives and loved by people. But I said only because there were many more attempts to attack the United States which were thwarted. And I said it to point out, and that was mostly from people coming, that was people coming from outside in here, by and large. So when you read things that are horrible, like the Boston Marathon murders, or the doctor at Fort Hood who was in the American military, or this awful thing at San Bernardino, or what happened in Paris, it's very important to stop, look, listen, ask how you can stop other ones. But it may be representative of our concerns, but not reflective of a trend. So I'll tell you another story. A couple days after San Bernardino, in the Bronx in New York City, 2 men came in to rob a little convenience store. I read about it the next day in the New York Daily News. And since I'm home alone a lot, I'm an avid consumer of newspapers. And there was no article in our other, in the New York Times or the New York Post, at least that I saw. Just a little article about this robbery. So these guys come in, they have masks and they each have a pistol. One of them stands and guards the door. The other one points the gun at the guy behind the counter and says, "Open the cash register and give me your money." He's terrified. He opens the cash register. He puts the money in his hands. And according to the article, he just sort of blurts out without thinking about it, "Hey, you know, I've only had this job a year." He's thinking, this is not my money, and this is certainly not yours. And he immediately reaches out and swats the gun hand of the guy with the gun on it. The gun goes off, misses him by a few inches, lodges in the counter. And thank goodness these people were not totally nuts. They said, "We have just fired a gun in New York City in broad daylight. Not a good idea." So they raced out. He immediately went next door, called the police, came back, waited to make a report, and put the money up, of course. And his boss came in, and the guy was so thrilled with his employee's bravery that he gave him the afternoon off. Here's the deal. He went home to his tiny apartment, pulled out his prayer rug, got down on his knees, a Yemeni immigrant who had been here since 2002, still living in a tiny apartment, sending all his money home to his wife and 4 children, now 15, 17, 19, and 21. And he thanked his God for sparing his life and prayed that maybe at last his wife and 4 children would be able to join him. He is far more representative of the Muslim community in America than what happened in San Bernardino. This battle we're fighting in a world where the borders look more like nets than walls is also going on. Look, I support the President's strategy of sending special forces to help the Kurds and the Peshmerga and others fight in Syria to beat ISIS. It's important. Most of the Syrians would like to go home. But it's also being fought inside the brains of 1 billion or more people. And we can't win that fight without the moderate Muslims. We need their help. It's just another example that you need to get diverse groups with common goals to figure out how to work together. Anyway, so that's what I would say. Every time you hear, don't discount. Look, on its own, what happened in San Bernardino was horrible. What happened in Paris was unspeakable. What happened at Fort Hood was awful. What happened at the Boston Marathon was awful. What would have happened with all those things that had been stopped since the 1990s would have been awful. But the trend line for Muslims in America is to embrace diversity, express restraint, work like heck to be good citizens and make a good living, to support their families and be accepted in their communities. So we have to find a way to fight that which is awful with as many allies as we can. And demonizing people by group is an error. That's worth what you paid for. That's what I think.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier we called it the tyranny of now, which is coined, I think, by Oliver Stone, when you just get in the moment and you don't look at the trends or the future, the vision of the future.
You're going to look. You shouldn't. We need to invest quite a lot of money in continuing to improve our ability to stop big bad things from happening. But if you want to live in a world that's safer, more prosperous, more peaceful, where we can make more of the assets that bring all of you together, that got all of you into these chairs today, a world where our brains are working and our hearts feel free to embrace others without fear, then you can't mistake a terrible thing you never want to happen again and what you should do in response to it with turning it into a trend that will only drive us further apart. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Thank you. Well, while we're tackling tough things, Mr. President, the Syrian refugee crisis is such a big problem. It makes every other problem seem easy. What can world leaders do to fix it? What can we do in the medical technology, healthcare ecosystem to fix it? And is there a silver lining? Is there an end in sight for the suffering of these people and how we deal with it?
Well, first, let me make the argument that I disagree with. But it's a very good argument if you make it well. For all who say, I mean, it's emotionally compelling. For all who say, I'm sorry, I know a lot of those people are nice people, we just shouldn't take anybody. Their argument is 6,000 Europeans, mostly young, left Europe and went to ISIS land, lured by the social media. 1,500 have apparently, give or take, come home. Let's assume 99% of them came home because they were revolted by the murderous, destructive, awful things they saw. Leaving only 15 who are moles in effect. That's more than it took to kill all those people in Paris. That's their argument, so why take a chance? The problem is, I have a good friend who's very active working with the refugees, and the young man who used to work for me has now actually moved to Greece to be there helping to bring them in. So I talk to them all the time. Yesterday morning I had coffee with this friend of mine from Canada, and he said, we actually started filming as many people as we could who were getting off these boats, asking them two questions. What did you do in Syria before you came here? And if the violence stopped, would you like to go home? He said, the second one was almost everybody said, yes, you end the violence, we want to go home. Now that argues for resettling as many people in the best possible temporary conditions so it'll be as easy as possible for them to go home if you believe it can be ended within a matter of a couple of years. The Turks understood this, interestingly enough. I have great differences with Mr. Erdogan and his government these days, but you've got to give it to the Turks. They have taken more than 200,000 Syrians, and they have organized them in living pods of 10,000 with physical facilities, which I am told, I've never been there, but I'm told are among the best ever built in terms of being attractive, non-demeaning, functional for families, and adaptable for families of different sizes. In the last 3 years, in eastern Turkey, which has a few million people, there are 200,000 Syrians. They are responsible for starting 26% of the new businesses. And I say that because the answer to the first question has been like a rainbow, but there are an unusual number of doctors, university professors, people who ran businesses of all sizes, young entrepreneurs, and people who did a lot of the kind of work you'd expect in America. They're truck drivers, people who worked in factories, people who did all this stuff. There are all kinds of people. And my friend at least believes that the United States and Canada could safely take a substantial number of these refugees because he said they actually have a pretty good screening process before they ever get to knock on the door of any individual country. The publicity in Germany has not helped that, of course. So I don't mean to say this is an easy issue. And I admit to a certain bias here. I've spent a fair amount of time in Cleveland and Dearborn, Michigan, which is the seat of America, where the largest Syrian-American settlements are. If you went there and badmouthed the Syrians, you would be picking a fight, not with a Syrian, but with an Irishman, a Pole, an Italian, an African-American, and a Hispanic-American, because they like those people, and they know what good people they are, and what gifted business people they are, how hard they work, and how important they are in their communities. The mayor of Detroit told me not very long ago, he said, if we didn't have to pay for it, because, you know, Detroit's just come out of bankruptcy, we have thousands of habitable houses from a safety point of view that still need to be upgraded, and we could take them. Dearborn would come down and support a lot of people. We just need to think about this. The only point, I'm not trying to make this simple, but I think the United States ought to honor what the Germans have done by trying to shoulder the load. The Norwegians, which were for years the only country that met the UN goal of giving 0.7% of GDP to foreign assistance, and were great partners of our foundation in a number of projects. And they have a conservative government. And last summer, the Prime Minister and the Chief Development Person told me that they were going to cut back development across the board this year so they could take more Syrian refugees. And then, believe it or not, they actually went to work trying to convince other people to give us the money they've been giving us because they don't want the development work to stop. But they said, we can't let Germany do this alone. If we don't do it, you know, the rest of Europe won't follow. President Hollande, after France, was magnificent after Paris was attacked. Magnificent. And they got all those people in like 2 days, you know, or most of them anyway. But when he was asked, now that Paris had suffered so much, and 10% of their population is North African Muslim, are you going to say no? He said, absolutely not. We can't change the character of our country. You can argue this flat around, but I think you have to understand that in the end, all kinds of advances in science of allowing people to feel positively about their own identities, whatever they are, multiple identities, but at the same time to be able to compare themselves with other people in positive, not negative terms. Those are the nations that will be most successful in the 21st century. That's what I believe. It's been my experience. And it's also true that just, you know, the vast mass of people are decent people who have the same dreams and the same hopes and were raised in different cultures to organize reality in different ways. So it's exciting knowing all these people. Look at this crowd. If you had had this movement 50 years ago, most of you would look like me. Old gray-haired white guys in suits. Now, I thank you for not entirely eliminating my demographic. So I don't feel home alone. But I mean, look at you. You're young, you're old, you're middle-aged, you're men, you're women, you're from all kinds of background. Don't you think you're going to make better collective decisions if you tackle this problem than if you were a more homogenous group 50 years ago? just dealing with let's take one of the simpler aspects of patient safety. Making sure uniform sterilization practices are followed in all major stages of hospital care. With a diverse group, you will understand that might mean something very different if you're caring in the hospital with a Muslim woman who's particularly strict in her religious observance than if you're dealing with someone who makes a living in a rock group and is 21 and is not particularly self-conscious about saying, just get the show on the road, let's do what we have to do to make sure no germs are going to kill me. I don't want sepsis. I mean, just think about it. So, look, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. My daughter was on the board beginning when she worked at NYU, but still, of the largest interfaith student group at any university in America, they're mostly Muslims and Jews, mostly. But there are some people from other backgrounds. They took 10 years ago, they took 2 buses all the way to Katrina to work in the Gulf Coast together and to model for everybody else what the future is. And they answered questions. So they're down there, and even heartbroken people were so amazed they were asking them questions. They said, will you still argue and fight? And the rabbi and the imam, who's an Indonesian, are trying to say, oh yeah, we argue all the time. We're people. We'd be stupid if we never disagreed. But we don't hate each other. We love each other. And therefore we can hear each other's arguments. I think this is a very big deal, and you're entitled to think I'm naive in my declining years, but I am nearly positive I'm right about this.
We love you thinking about these, Mr. President. I'm going to switch the channel now a little bit to our world. I'll ask you maybe the broad question. How has your commitment to zero, while I know it looks hard with just 4 years left to go, zero preventable deaths, how has your commitment to that changed your life? How has it impacted you?
My favorite cousin as a child growing up went to a perfectly adequate clinic in the little retirement community she lived in, 7 miles north of the house I grew up in. She was 2 years older than me. She was feeling a little weak, and her weight had dropped to 95 pounds. And she was diagnosed as having the flu and told to take Theraflu. 48 hours, she was markedly worse. They rushed her to the hospital. They found out she had sepsis. She was dead in 36 hours. And so I got started studying this. This is deeply personal, and I put myself in the position of, look, I love this woman, but at least she had had a good life and seen her kids grow up and had a great-granddaughter who spoke at her funeral and had some semblance of a whole life. And yet I still felt robbed. Her mother lived to be 98 when only her inherent limitations basically determined her exit. And I just started thinking about all the people who were just going into these like big urban hospitals with plenty of capacity but massive problems. And how easy it is when you're trying to run a big operation to let the little details fall through the cracks, or to be so busy you don't have people step back and find all the smaller possibilities that could collectively have a massive impact on this. And since I believe we are all under, whether you're religious or not, some sort of moral imperative to live as long and as well as we can and to give others that opportunity. And that should inform our dealings with other people, the way we look at other children, the way we look at people that we're trying to decide, should we bomb them today or not? Is there another alternative? All this, I just think it should be part of who we are. But I got here on the shoulders of my cousin, who when I was a little boy believed that I could amount to something and supported me when most people in my school thought I was a fat bad boy with limited prospects. And one day she was just gone from a perfectly preventable death. I also think one of the things that will come out of this that you haven't banked on is that if you succeed in this, then immediately everybody will ask you to broaden the definition of I'll give you an example. A friend of Senator Boxer, a student of mine, was a famous producer named Michael King, who just died a few months ago. And he was several years younger than me. I think he was 61 when he died. He was a big Irish guy who didn't have anything when he was a kid and became wildly successful. He worked with Oprah Winfrey. He worked with a lot of other syndicated shows and made a fortune and spent the rest of his life trying to give a lot of it away. He went to Paris and got sick, and everybody thought he had flu. Same story. Now, he didn't have sepsis in the beginning. He had some sort of virus that could not be diagnosed, which is happening more and more. And all the available antibiotics didn't work to treat it. Then he was taken to a fine medical facility in Los Angeles, and they tried everything to find some way to answer this problem he had. Just to get picked up on a trip to France. They never were able to identify the nature of his infection, and no amount of available antibiotics. They went through the whole alphabet soup, and finally they threw everything against the wall, and nothing made him better, and he died. Genomics and nanotechnology are going, I hope, to allow dramatic increases in diagnostic capabilities. Then the definition of preventable death will be a Michael King, who's not Michael King, but somebody who's stuck in a small, out-of-the-way hospital in rural Iowa or someplace in a developing country. And how can we make sure that all of our research facilities are interfaced so we can deal with that? So the good news is I think you can make this go if enough people help you. The bad news is people will be so impressed when you do it, they'll ask you to expand the definition of preventable, and you'll have to wake up the next day and go to work again. But that's what makes life meaningful, I think, and perfectly exciting. So I wish you all well in this, but I ask you to make a serious commitment. I'm telling you, one thing that people are legitimately skeptical about in the world today is they've seen system after system after system fail them. And they feel they don't know who they can trust or what they can trust. You will have a positive social impact with this. It's hard to believe, even beyond the massive numbers of lives you can save per year, just because people like you with education and study gifts had the wisdom and insight to build this kind of alliance. At first, when people will read this, when you do it, nobody will believe it. Or a lot of people. because they're used to systems letting them down. And the truth is, most of them are working pretty good, but the world's changing so fast, they can't adapt quickly enough. So I think you should remember this. This achievement will have an impact even beyond the lives saved, the families grateful, the communities enriched. It will make people believe in the possibility of progress again. So that if you do it right, we'll give people something to look forward to when they wake up in the morning. And if you want to deal with the heroin and prescription drug epidemic, you have to tackle it with treatment and mental health. But you also have to give all those middle-aged people something to look forward to when they get up in the morning. Thank you.
I'd like to get some advice from you, for all of us. As you know, when we first talked about holding the first summit, we didn't know if we were going to have a second summit. And thanks to you, thanks to the efforts of many people at the second summit, we talked about 600 lives saved. At the third, which was last year, over 6,400 lives saved. At this summit, we've announced through the work of many people, 1,600 hospitals now, in 30 countries, over 24,000 lives have been saved. So there's annual, not additive. Additive is over 30,000. So over 30,000 cousins, moms, dads, children have been saved. But in the U.S. alone, we think we've saved about 20,000 lives with our efforts and others around us, like Partnership for Patients and other groups. So we have 4 years left to go. We really want to get to zero. And how do we scale it? You've scaled things beyond beyond our imagination. How do we scale it? What advice do you have to the people here, the people watching? How do we scale this to get to zero?
In America?
In America.
Well, I think I don't know what you're using for communication and reports, but I would make sure that every institution in America, first of all, define who would have to be involved for me to be successful. And I wouldn't say 4 years from now, I'd say, suppose who would have to be involved doing what these people that have saved 20,000 lives have done are doing? Who would have to be involved for us to be at 100% successful right now? A whole list. I would then make sure that every one of them knew what had been achieved and who had achieved it, so that at least they had no excuse for not participating. Then I would have this meeting the way you're having it now, like you're discussing aspects of patient safety that you haven't in the past. And every year I would keep using this meeting to plow new ground on, as you learn more, on the things that where there are exciting new developments or an aspect of patient safety that you haven't gone to in depth. But I would also have a regional strategy once you get all this information out to all the actors you would have to be at 100% tomorrow. Then I would have a regional strategy, and I would go to all of I'd have 4, 5, 6, 8, I don't know however many meetings you need to have. And I would get those people in there. And if the big ones didn't come, I'd go see them. And I'd say, look, here's the evidence. We need you. Your patients need you. Their families need you. Their communities need you. We can do this. This is easier than I thought. That's what you'd say when you're It's not impossible, but it is impossible if you sit on the sidelines. We know we got enough evidence now. Because one of the things that happens when you start one of these deals is you can't know where it will end. And sometimes you have to really worry on having a system that will acknowledge what problems you're having. Like I just told you, we did the soda pops and the juice because there were fewer players, and we didn't make it nearly where we wanted to with the candy bars because we had more players. And they weren't necessarily bad people, but you didn't want to jump off the ledge and look back and everybody else is standing on the cliff laughing at you. And so that's what I would do. I think you've reached the point now where once you get 20,000 laughs, you know what systems and procedures and players work. So I think you should not depend on the publicity and efforts of this summit to do that. I think this should be a learning experience for everybody, including the people that are already in your network, already making the 20,000 thing, the goal possible. Then I think you have to send the results and an explanation of how they were achieved to every single player that you believe you'd have to reach 100%. And then I think you have to schedule regional meetings and go see them. And then if you got big players that still won't participate, I think you have to knock on their doors, and sit in the waiting area until they see you. I think you got to at least make them say no face to face.
Thank you.
That's what I would.
We've got our work cut out this year.
That's what I think that will work better. I think with busy people, it's easy to push a piece of paper. It's not so easy to say no to somebody who's looking you in the eye with a self-evident, stunning success that you can be a part of. And also don't be discouraged. Replicating excellence is very difficult to achieve if the targets are already succeeding by other more conventional measures. And you shouldn't be discouraged by this. But that's the biggest problem in American education. Every problem in our education system has been solved by somebody somewhere. But it's exceedingly difficult to replicate excellence. I remember once I got 30 years ago, I know you got to go, but 30 years ago or more, maybe 32 years ago, when the first President Bush was in office, his education department was very good to us. And they gave us permission to use money that was for individuals with disabilities and monies for Title I money for low-income kids, not to overclassify kids when they were too young as being either disabled or unable to learn fully. And we did two things. One, we went to much smaller classes, 15 for kids per class, and we got the smartest 6-year-olds, believe it or not, to work in a systematic, planned way that we organized with the others. The other thing we did was we realized our dropout rate started usually in the 9th grade. We had a high dropout rate because if you can't read by the time you're out of the 8th grade, everything you study from then on is totally beyond you and you're bored and want to study. So we found this young teacher in a small town with poor students who was determined to reduce the dropout rate to 0. He was a zero kind of like you. And he realized that his kids couldn't read, and they certainly couldn't write. And therefore, there was no reasonable chance they would ever be able to absorb a certain sophisticated level of math and science. So he was a 9th grade teacher. He made every student he had write a 1-page essay that was biographical in some way every day. Every day that poor man took home. And every class he took, every day, whatever, he taught 4 or 5 classes a day. Every day he took home a 1-page autobiographical essay for every student. And he read them all. And every day he corrected every word. Every day. But guess what? The dropout rate in the school dropped to 0. Their performance rate exploded. In the other case, for the little kids, there were 4 7-year-olds that had been held back, had to do the 1st grade again. When they went through the new system, they give diagnostic tests. That's what all you can do to 6-year-olds. You can't. And they scored 4 times better than they had before. The kids that would have been separated out scored 3 times better, and the overall class scored twice as well. So I sent these stunning results out to every school system and told them that the state would pay them to send someone to come to either one or both of these things, and only 10% did. So I know what you're up against now. So I believe that the more user-friendly you make accessing this remarkable project, the more people will feel excited about this as a promise instead of burdened or not wanting to think they'll be the only people that won't succeed, or, there's 1,000 reasons people don't jump off a diving board. So I just give you that example. Don't be discouraged, but you got to do more direct contact. People have to believe your data, they have to believe your results, and they have to believe that they'll feel a lot better about the work of their lives if they join. Thank you.
Thank you. So next year we work around the inauguration. Can we do it after before?
It's a weird time out there. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I know this. Everybody's angry and everybody's afraid. My experience throughout a long life in public life and private life working in my NGO is this: anger can be very good, but only if it leads to responsibility and answers. Most of us, myself included, can look back on a life of a certain length and see that we made more bad decisions and good decisions when we were angry. There's plenty of reasons to be angry if you've been left out. But look at us, we're having a good time here. So, you know how many people who, if they were watching this on, television, would say, so what am I? Shop flipper, I'm just sitting here thinking I can't even pay my bills. My kid's got a college debt that she can't repay, all this stuff. The trick in a tight is not to let anger control what happens, because anger is disempowering. In the end, even blame, which is responsibility, is important. Blame is disempowering. The trick is to get people to say, what can I do? To go from anger to answers. And it's an unpredictable moment. But this country is the longest democracy in continuous existence in human history. And Winston Churchill once said that when Roosevelt wasn't in World War II yet, that the United States of America invariably does the right thing after exhausting every other alternative. So we are in the ethereal space here. We'll see. But people need a hand. You all can, when you go home, you can see that. You can see people need to believe again that not only is this a great country, but it's one that can have inclusive growth, inclusive social policy, inclusive politics. They just want to believe tomorrow will be better than today. And they have a right to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.